All right, today we're going to work on lesson 3.9, which is proving lines parallel. So we're going to take some of those concepts that we've been working on the last few days with parallel lines and transversals, and we're going to flip them, write the converse of them, if you will, and use those to help us prove that lines are parallel. So jumping into it here, we can use the converse of the relationships between the special angles created by a transversal and parallel lines to prove that lines are parallel. So if we just go through them all, you're going to see that we can use any of the ones that we've had. So for instance, the converse of the corresponding angles theorem. Okay. This says if two lines are cut by a transversal so that corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. If you remember, what we said about corresponding angles initially was if lines are parallel, then corresponding angles are congruent. What we're now saying is the converse, that if corresponding angles are congruent, then we can now conclude lines are parallel. And you'll see how we abbreviate this and use it in proofs. Same thing works for alternate exterior angles. Prior to this, we said that if lines were parallel, then alternate exterior angles would be congruent. Now we're saying that if alternate exterior angles are congruent, then the lines have to be parallel. Alternate interior angles converse. If two lines are cut by a transversal so that alternate interior angles are congruent, then those lines have to be parallel. And consecutive interior angles converse. This is the one that's a little different. If two lines are cut by a transversal so that the consecutive interior angles are supplementary. Remember, these two add up to 180, same side of the transversal on the interior. If we can prove that, then the lines are parallel. So we're going to start working with some basic proofs today, and then we're going to get in a little bit more advanced. So for example, this is what they're going to look like, and you're going to have to write out your own proofs. And for the reasons here, they have pop-ups, that you'll have to choose from. So you'll have a list to choose from to make it a little bit more clear. So in this first example, they're saying use the given information to prove that F is parallel to G. We're given that angle 8 is congruent to angle 4. Obviously, we're trying to prove F parallel to G. Okay, well, if I look up here, always try to look to see how you're going to get your proof accomplished first. If I look up here, I see angle 8 and angle 4 are alternate exterior angles, and they're telling me they're congruent. Well, we just had a theorem that said if alternate exterior angles are congruent, then the lines have to be parallel. So that's all it's going to take. I'm going to write my given down here, angle 8 congruent to angle 4. And then because they're alternate exterior angles and they're congruent, I can say, hey, the lines are parallel now because if alternate exterior angles are congruent, then lines are parallel. Okay, so that's just a little reason. And that pops up and you have that choice to bring that down. Okay, let's look at another one here. Use information to prove that A is parallel to B. Here's our transversal. They tell us 7 and 5 are congruent, and they're asking us to prove A parallel to B. Well, let's take a look. 7 and 5 are corresponding angles, and if corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So enter in your given, angle 7 congruent to angle 5. That's enough. We now know A is parallel to B because if corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines have to be parallel. Those are pretty basic, pretty straightforward. This one's a little bit more detailed. We're not trying to prove lines parallel. We're given information about parallel lines and trying to prove a set of angles congruent. So let's look at what we're told here. We're first of all, if it looks, we're trying to prove angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. So there's angle 1, here's angle 5. We don't have a direct correlation between the two. So we're going to look at what we're given and how we can get there. All right, we're told that CB is parallel to DF. All right, so this line is parallel to this line segment. That makes this a transversal. That makes 1 and 2 alternate interiors. Okay, we're also told that CD, this line, is parallel to GE, this line. All right, so that's going to make 2 and 5 alternate interiors. And if you think about it, if 1 and 2 are congruent and 2 and 5 are congruent, then 1 and 5 are congruent by transitive. So that's going to be our process here. So we're going to start with our given. CB is parallel to DF and CD is parallel to GE. From the first given, CB parallel to DF, I know angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because of if lines are parallel, then alternate interior angles are congruent. I also know, because CD is parallel to GE, that angle 2 is congruent to angle 5, because angle 2 and angle 5 are alternate interiors between these two lines. So if the lines are parallel, which we know they are, then alternate interior angles are congruent. Now, when we use transitive, we have to use it between just two statements. So one's congruent to two, two's congruent to five. So we can conclude one's congruent to five by the transitive property. And that's what they asked us to prove, one congruent to five. Okay, but you just kind of do a little pre-work here. Don't just jump in and try to write it. Understand that every given is leading you to a piece of information you need to get to the end. Okay, this one's a bit more complicated, a few more steps to it. We'll talk our way through it. All right, so we're trying to prove this angle down here is congruent to angle 7 up here. Okay, we're told FG is parallel to DE. So FG, this line segment, is parallel to DE. And we're told angle 5 and angle 6 are congruent. And we're trying to prove BC and DE, BC and DE are parallel. That's a given. We're trying to prove 2 and 7. So just as I look through it quick, starting with FG parallel to DE, that tells us that 3 and 5 are alternate interiors, so they're congruent. I also know 3 and 2 are vertical to each other, so they're congruent. Up here, we know angle 7 and angle 6 are congruent. These lines are parallel. They told us BC and DE are parallel. These are alternate interiors. And we're told 5 is congruent to 6. All right, so we kind of step our way through it. If 2 is congruent to 3 and 3 is congruent to 5, then 2 is congruent to 5. If 2 is congruent to 5 and 5 is congruent to 6, then 2 is congruent to 6. And if 2 is congruent to 6 and 6 is congruent to 7, then 2 is congruent to 7. So that's like a big transitive process there. So that's how we're going to get to it, okay? Let's just go ahead and write it here. So I'm going to enter my given. FG is parallel to DE. FG parallel to DE. So the one conclusion I know for sure here is that angle 3 and angle 5 have to be congruent because the lines are parallel and they're alternate interiors. Okay, also down here, I know that 2 and 3 are congruent because of vertical angles property. Okay, need that information, like I said, to do my transitive here. Okay, gonna enter in my next given that BC is parallel to DE. So BC parallel to DE. What conclusion do we get there? Well, 7 and 6 are alternate interior angles. So lines are parallel, alternate interior angles are congruent. My last given that 5 is congruent to 6. Now that allows me to set up all my transitives here. Okay, so I got 2 congruent to 3, 3 congruent to 5, 5 congruent to 6, 6 congruent to 7. So I'm going to get 2 congruent to 7, but it's going to take a little bit. Okay, so the first thing I did is if 2 is congruent to 3, 3 is congruent to 5, then 2 is congruent to 5. That's my first transitive. Okay, now I'm going to put these two together. If 2 is congruent to 5 and 5 is congruent to 6, oops, I guess I did the other two. If 5 is congruent to 6 and 6 to 7, then 5 is congruent to 7. And then my last one here, if 2 is congruent to 5 and 5 is congruent to 7, then 2 is congruent to 7. I guess you can do this in a variety of ways, but we got to the end here. 2 is congruent to 7. So, it's about taking the givens, having an idea, a plan of attack as to how you're going to get from where you started to where you need to be, and use all the given information. Okay. Now, doing Alex work that this gets to be a very pattern-like. So once you get the hang of it, you'll be able to go through these, I think, fairly well. But you're going to have to practice it a bit, and you're going to have to learn to make a plan and write some things out. And it's a logical thinking process, and that's really what we're after here: is the ability to think logically and chain some ideas together here. All right, I'll let you get